All right, so let's get started. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Lakefront Landscaping class. My name is Tia Solvesi, and I'm the Florida-friendly landscaping agent with the University of Florida, IFAS Extension in Orange County. And also I have Tina McIntyre, and she's the FFL agent in Seminole County. So today we're going to be educating you about good practices for your lakefront, how to choose beneficial plants, and how to handle some of those nuisance plants, and some other Florida-friendly practices, for managing aquatic vegetation. So if you're not familiar with the Florida-friendly landscaping principles, we have 9 principles that guide our program. And together, these all work to help you have a more sustainable, environmentally friendly landscape that, is good for the environment and that doesn't, pollute our waterways, so we can keep clean waterways. It's really a water program disguised as a landscape program, because the things that you do in your yard can affect our water bodies. And we have some very awesome water resources here in Central Florida: springs, rivers, lakes, oceans. So it's important that we protect them. Today's class is mainly going to be focused on principle number 9, which is to protect the waterfront. And we're going to do that with plants and then limiting pollutants in the area. So I'm going to first start by talking about the benefits of shoreline plants. So these plants really do like triple duty in protecting our water bodies. They protect the water quality because they have roots that are into the ground. They're holding the ground. They're slowing the water flow, the runoff. They're holding that sediment in and trapping sediment, and that helps to keep the lakes clean. They're also capturing nutrients, that might be running off your lawn or just sucking them out of the lake or the water body. And another thing that helps keep it clean by sucking up those nutrients and reducing the algae blooms. Additionally, they provide wildlife habitat, for birds, for ducks, for fish, spawning fish. And finally, it's just aesthetically pleasing. A really nicely done shoreline landscape looks beautiful. You see all kinds of wildlife out there, and it's healthy for the lake. So if you have a really nice, shoreline, then you should feel good about it, because it does take some work. So what makes a nice lakescape or shoreline planting? Well, we want to see it full of native plants in all different zones of the lakefront, upland all the way to the deep water. As you can see in this picture here, they have the water lilies and some duck potato, and it's really nicely fully vegetated. They even have a couple cypress trees closer to the house. And so that creates a beneficial habitat for all the wildlife. And if you can have it thickly planted with native plants, those plants are resilient, and hopefully too much nuisance vegetation doesn't come in. And if it does, you might have to, just pull some weeds in the lake too. We'll get into that later. It can also work for you. It doesn't have to be completely all plants. You're allowed to have an access area for, swimming or boating, or to build a boat dock. That's perfectly legal and fine. And again, it's going to look beautiful if you do it right. So I'm going to turn it over to Tina now to introduce some of these native species, that are native from Florida and beneficial.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Tia. And I really just want to take a second to kind of show you how Florida-friendly landscaping and native plants interact. So Florida-friendly landscaping is a larger umbrella that includes native species and non-native species. However, when we're talking about the waterfronts, the lakes, the rivers, the shorelines of our counties, we want to think about really focusing in on native species around the lakefront. And that is because they are such delicate systems and they are hotspots for our wildlife. And so even though Florida Friendly incorporates native species in the regular, landscape shrubs and turfs, things like that, we really want to emphasize native species and our aquatic native species here at the lakeshore. And that's what we're going to be doing today. Next slide. Mm-hmm. So some design shore basics where we have our shoreline zones, thinking about the natural shoreline of a lake. And, this is how a lake might be, right? Throughout geological time, that lake is forming, the water is pooling over time, things are, kind of being grown and then dying, right? It's a natural kind of existence of that lake. And then we might also have a retention pond or a shoreline kind of area that is a canal that might be not as natural, but we want to try to mimic that natural slope and vegetation as best we can, right? We're living in an urban area. We recognize we have canals, we have, the ditches and all the different things that y'all are mentioning. And what we want to do is just try to mimic as best we can the natural slope and the natural progression of plants. So, if you kind of have a stormwater pond that has a hard angle, maybe softening it a little bit, getting as much vegetation as you can, because I do recognize some of those, have quite a steep bank. But other areas you might be able to kind of sneak in those plants, and it's going to go into these different zones. So thinking about things that are actually in the water, they need water to survive. Farther out, this might be things like lily pads or even submerged aquatic vegetation like our invasive Hydrilla or our native Utricularia, which is a carnivorous plant, just kind of a curious little thing. It actually will eat various zooplankton and things like that in the water column. It's a great native aquatic plant. And that's going to be submerged in the water. Then as we move towards the shoreline, we're going to have things that are emergent plants that are coming out of the water, but they're still rooted in that wet area. As we continue, we get to the bank slope zone, or maybe called the riparian or littoral zone, as it's that's the area where the shoreline might wax and wane. So during our rainy season, that water's going to get high. It's going to submerge these plants a little bit. They're going to be pretty wet during the summer. And then this time of year, as we're getting less rain, that water level is going to drop. They're going to be perfectly happy. And then as we continue, that bank's top zone, and we might call it, or the top of the bank, or, the really more dry area, but still quite wet. We're getting a lot of flow into the lake in this area. So, you can have a grade that's nice and sloped. You can have it a little bit more, but really just trying to get that slope and get that grading of vegetation, that diversity of vegetation as you approach the water. So we do actually have a fantastic resource for you here, and you can just take your phone if you're watching it on an iPad or a computer and scan it with your camera app and get that QR code just like you would at a restaurant. It links right to this fantastic resource, a list of freshwater aquatic plants for Florida. This is I believe a UF IFAS publication. I don't know if it's out of your office, Tia, or the larger university, but it's a great resource. And maybe if Jeanette could be so kind as to maybe drop it in the chat for those that don't have the QR set up, that way they can enjoy it, or maybe we'll email it to you afterwards. But this is going to walk you through that, kind of grouping of plants from the upland all the way down to the submerged. And we do have a lot of great resources for you as well. So now we're going to kind of really take a look at these plants for each zone. So starting off at when our 2 feet are planted on the land and it's high and dry, but we're actually starting to walk down to the lake. You might see things like sand cord grass, also just called cord grass, or maybe Spartina, known by its binomial. That is a bunching grass. And for those of you in the coastal areas, it's actually a salty marsh kind of grass, so it can take some salt to it as well. Muley grass, this is a fantastic bunching grass to stabilize the bank, get it nice and rooted in. So those bunching grasses are going to put their roots deep down in there, hold the soil in. So when we get our hurricanes, we get our crashing storms in the summertime, your soil's not going anywhere. You're not going to have erosion. Wax myrtle, this is going to be a shrub-like tree. It can also be turned into a hedge. Myrca cerifera, this is a great one. And I didn't mention at the top, but I used to do lake surveys for Orange County. And when I would see this very often. So we're trying to replicate what has been on these lake shores for a long time. Buttonbush, Cephalanthus occidentalis. This is such a cool flower. It has a spherical flower that's white, nice wildlife and pollinator bush. We have lovegrass, beautyberry, elderberry. Elderberries love it wet. They're a fantastic native plant, and they're also edible in the berries. So the leaves are actually toxic. Got to know what you're working with there, but the berries are actually edible. Goldenrod or solidago, some nice wildflowers to add to your bank stability. And then we have trees. So pictured here, we have our cypress trees. There's two types, the bald cypress or the pond cypress. We have our red maple, which gives beautiful color. As we enter into the cooler months, it's going to turn that crimson red, and beautiful green foliage during the summertime. American elm, sweet gum, Dahoon holly. Dahoon holly has nice berries for wildlife. Sweetbag magnolia and Carolina willow. And so now I just want to touch real quick on our other principle, which is attract wildlife. And, you know, a lot of us might be worried about the view, right? The lake view, that we have our lakeside house and we want to be able to see. We don't want all that vegetation in the way. So you can't have a clearing. We'll get to the rules later, but you also want to think about vegetating that shoreline for stability, but also because, I'm just going to mute this. You know, vegetating that shoreline, providing food for wildlife. So thinking about your lake view, but thinking about how cool it would be to be able to attract birds and wildlife and otters into your yard, which you have that capacity to do. And that is also a view as well. So think about attracting those critters. And plants for each zone, you know, there is low growing, these bunching grasses are going to be able to clear that view that you want to maintain while still having those trees and shrubs maybe on the side, so you can provide wildlife while maintaining that. They're also going to protect from filter those nutrients and pollutants. So if there's different spills or oils or gas or things from our urban areas, excess fertilizers, pesticides, these are amazing plants that just charge it right up and filter the air, filter the water. So continuing our walk down to the water, we're going to be in the riparian area. In the riparian area, we have lots of great options. We have golden canna, blue flag iris. A lot of these are going to be providing flowers for our pollinators. Frog fruit, which is Phylla nodiflora. This is very low growing. So, you know, if you're, again, want to have a little bit more of a ground cover, frog fruit is fantastic. It's also going to have little teeny tiny flowers for the bees and the butterflies. Bacopa likes it real wet, so it's going to be able to get its feet wet pretty well, and it can actually grow underwater. A lot of these plants are going to be able to take dry and then very wet and kind of exist in that way. Lizard's tail, Sororus sidaris. This one likes a little bit of shade, so if you have a shady area, this would be a great candidate. And swamp hibiscus, one of my favorites. These blooms are just amazing. They get about to be this big, the size of my head. They're crimson red and just quite gorgeous. Difficult to grow unless you have a wet area. All of our swamp milkweeds, we have lots of Asclepias species that love it wet. So you have a fantastic candidate for that landscape. Carolina Aster, so it's going to be kind of a climbing aster, a little vine that likes it wet. We have a Biden species. This is not your Biden's alba that might be a kind of a bane to your garden. This is a different type of Bidens. You might be able to find this at native plant nurseries. And then to close it out, we have the cardinal flower or even some of our ferns. Now, keep in mind, ferns don't typically as a whole like it too sunny. There are some exceptions to that, but if you have a little bit of shade, ferns might be a great idea. Just be sure to plant this and not that. Do not incorporate our invasive sword ferns. Those are no good. And just to show you some pictures, here we have our golden canna pictured. I mean, who doesn't want to see that during the summertime where we're having beautiful yellow flowers? The native one is yellow. They do come in orange with a beautiful variegation of orange. And that one is perfectly fine. It's Florida friendly, but the canna is native for the canna flaccida. Climbing aster, again, we have, this is actually in the sunflower family or Asteraceae family. It's going to be climbing, so you'd be able to plant this in conjunction with, say, a canna or other types of things. And then again, we have the frog fruit, which is going to be a low growing ground cover. Emergent plants. So these are plants that are going to be emerging from the water. So at this point, we're walking into the water pretty much year round. They're going to have some sort of wet feet, and they can take quite a bit of water. And they can take hurricanes where they're fully submerged. And then as that water goes down, they're going to be fine. Pickerel weed, one of our staples. This has got a beautiful purple flower. I'm sure we'll picture it again. This one's great for butterflies and really bank stability, you know, so as we're going into the water, it's going to be actively cleansing it. Our Sagittaria duck potato pictured here. There's a couple different species of Sagittaria. And you know, one of them is a smaller species. This one gets a little bit bigger. We have our soft rush or juncus, giant bulrush, and there is a dwarf bulrush as well. So if, you know, again, looking for that view, looking for that height, we can still find common ground. We can still do a bulrush. We just would want to get the more dwarf variety of bulrush instead of the giant, which can get 6 to 7 feet tall. Alligator flag, Thalia geniculata. These are bird attractants. So this one is going to flower and then seed, and all those seeds are great for birds. And they like to just kind of come and perch on their seed heads. Spike rush and Elaeocharis. This is a great shoreline. You'd be getting in the water to plant this one. And then cattail or typha. So typically people might spray our cattails. Cattails are native. They can become numerous when we're over fertilizing in our neighborhood or in our yard. So if you have a cattail problem, you want to ask what's going on in the surrounding area. Are we fertilizing too much and then it's rolling down and fertilizing the cattails instead of our turf? Cattails are fine in a balance of an ecosystem, but when we're seeing it take over our stormwater pond or take over the shoreline, that's when we can start to ask what kind of nutrients are coming in. Is it dog poop? Is it fertilizer? Those types of things. And, you know, here again, a beautiful picture of our pickerel weed in full bloom during the summer, the heat, the rain, the hard storms, hurricanes. This plant takes it with grace. So it's a fantastic one for your shorelines and fairly available. We'll talk about a few nurseries later. Littoral Zone. So now we are actually, if we had waders on, we'd be probably having that water topple over our waders. We better be wearing a swimsuit because we're pretty much going to start swimming soon. The Littoral Zone is where things are going to be rooted into the base of that lake. So they're quite farther down. And again, you know, your lakes are a natural system based on rain, or maybe there's connectivity to the springs. There might be some change over time, but typically these plants are going to be wet all year long. It's your water lilies, which does, true to its name, have a beautiful smell, Nymphaea odorata, odorous, and it smells quite lovely. That's pictured there in white. We have our cow lilies or nufar, lutea. I think it's it's misspelled on the photo there, but the one in the table is correct. Nufar is a fantastic, you know, again, great littoral zone plant. This is one that people might select to spray. And that is, again, we need to question what kind of nutrients are coming into that, because the cow lilies are just responding to the nutrients in the system. Maiden cane, Panicum hematobum. If you have torpedo grass, which a lot of us do, the bane of our existence in the landscape, in the lakeshore, it's a horrible invasive species. We want to come in and challenge it with our Panicum hematomum. Instead of Panicum repens, which is our torpedo grass, we want to plant native cane or Panicum hematomum. It's a great native plant that's going to give that other one a bit of competition. We also have cut grass and American lotus. American lotus, also another beautiful water lily that can, again, respond to nutrients. So any of these plants, native, non-native, are going to respond to any kind of nutrients in the system. That's why we want to, you know, really be careful how we're fertilizing and what's going on in the watershed. And please, if you have questions, drop them in the chat. We're going to go back through and make sure we don't miss you. And again, here's just some duck potatoes pictured with the cow lilies and the lakefront that Tia took at one of the beautiful Orange County lakes, one of the many Orange County and Central Florida lakes. You can see there's a cool little duck box. You know, I've had some great birds nest in the duck boxes over the years. And so consider putting one up. Again, it'll enhance the ecosystem. Now Tia's going to take it away with some of our nuisance species.
All right, so Tina had the fun part talking about all the beautiful, awesome aquatic plants. And I worked 7 years doing lakefront restoration with the company Lakefront Designs and Services. And I think all the aquatic plants are so beautiful. It's a topic that I'm really passionate about. When I go around and see the various lakes, you know, I kind of judge them all. Oh, that's a nice lakescape, or geez, those ones are clear cut, just white sandy beach and no plants, you know, not helping out the environment. So, you know, before you plant the native plants, sometimes you might have to do a little restoration of your lakefront. And so I'm just going to talk about a couple nuisance species that you might encounter, but there's many more. If you have a question about a particular species, you can email your local extension agent and, you know, send them a picture of the photo and they can help identify it for you. There's also a great UF-IFAS resource on aquatic plants. You can Google that. So nuisance species are mostly non-native plants that are kind of a problem for the environment. Problematic means it maybe spreads quickly. It may smother or harm the native plants. It may not offer any food for wildlife. So in that case, it may need to be managed and, you know, kept under control so it doesn't take over and reduce our biodiversity. But native plants can be considered nuisance too. And that's kind of a matter of opinion. Sometimes, for example, the cattails, like Tina discussed, you might not want your whole lakefront full of them, but they are a native beneficial plant that maybe you just keep them managed to the side part of your lakefront or something. Also, some of the vines, like the climbing hemp vine or the grapevine, they are native, but they can just be a little weedy. And so you might want to control or manage those a little bit. So here's probably the most popular nuisance species, the torpedo grass. And this is a really tough one to control because you can see how it just spreads, you know, from the underground stem here, and it just spreads all through the lakefront. And it's hard to just hand pull. You can hand pull it over time to help manage it, but really the best way to control it and work towards eradication is to spray it with a type of herbicide. And only aquatic herbicides should be used. And most of the time there is a permit required for you to use herbicide. So if you have a lakefront full of torpedo grass, you probably want to hire a professional to use that, a special aquatic herbicide, and spray it and cut it out and then restore it with the native plants. So this just grows very quickly, and it can smother the native plants. And sometimes it gets into our little bunches of pickerel weed and duck potato, and then we kind of have to shuffle them around a little bit to save them. Here's a popular one, not super popular in Central Florida lakes, but the water hyacinth is another one of a very bad nuisance plant. And this spreads very quickly. It is a floating plant, and so it's relatively easy to remove. If you see one, you know, float up in your lakefront, please go ahead and just pull it out. You can throw it away in your yard waste. It does die pretty quickly. You can also compost it, because once it gets out of the water, it dries out very quickly. It is illegal to transport these, so don't like put it in a bucket and take it somewhere else. That is illegal to do. But this is known for clogging up some waterways. You can see how prolific it is in the picture on the bottom, just like spreading and multiplying all over. And then in a case like that, you might need some larger machinery or some herbicide to knock that one out. Here's one that's quite popular in the Central Florida region. This is Primrose Willow, or Ludwigia peruviana. And this is like a kind of medium to large shrub. It can get to, you know, 6 to 10 feet tall. And it's not native to Florida, kind of a tall herbaceous plant, but it's relatively easy to remove by hand. If you have a machete, you can just kind of chop at it, or chop the roots to, you know, loosen it up and pull it out. Just pull it out by hand. It can also be treated with herbicides, but again, you probably need a permit for that. Now, be careful with this one. This is pretty easy to identify because of the large leaves and the large flowers, but there are several other species of Primrose Willow, like the Ludwigia genus, that are native to Florida, and they're beneficial species. So make sure you're getting the right species. Again, if you have any questions, you can email us some pictures. So the Hydrilla is one of the world's worst weeds, right up there with the purple nutsedge. And this is a submerged plant. So it doesn't grow out of the water. It grows from the base of the lake into the water. And this is hard to remove by hand. Just one little piece of it can start a new colony. It's difficult to remove with chemicals too, because you need a special underwater herbicide that's very expensive. So if your lake is plagued with this hydrilla, then often the FWC will introduce a couple grass carp fish. And those fish are like vegetarians, and they will eat all the vegetation. So that's kind of a more sustainable way to deal with this problem. But we're still having issues with the hydrilla, and it's, you know, costing us millions of dollars per year. So it's just something we don't have a great solution for yet, and we're just trying to do the best we can. So keep an eye out for it. You know, if you do see little pieces of it, you know, take it, dry it out, don't transport it. Also watch, you know, when you go boating on your boat prop, they always put the sign, like, make sure you remove any kind of aquatic vegetation from your boat prop, because you don't want to take this, you know, from a lake that has it to a pristine lake that does not have the hydrilla yet. So be careful of that. Make sure you clean off your boat and your trailer and your boat prop. So there's many more invasive species, but I'm going to go ahead and move on to the shoreline restoration part. So if you are, have a house on the lake or know somebody that does, and they say, oh, I want to fix up my lakefront a little bit, this part will kind of walk you through it. It is complicated with all the regulations, so just hang in there and let us get through it. So this slide is more for people in Orange County. So if you want to renovate your lakefront in Orange County, you need to check with the Florida DEP and also the Orange County EPD, and you need to get a permit for both of them. Now, it's not always clear what exactly needs to be done because there's so many exemptions, but whatever municipality you live in, you might have to get an additional permit. Plan to get 2 to 3 permits for any type of lakefront work. For example, if you live, in the city of Orlando, you might need to talk to their lakefront division. If you live in the city of Winter Park, they have their own rules. None of the rules are the same, so you really need to check all the municipalities that you're in. The city of Winter Garden has their own rules. They have their own shoreline vegetation permit. And then sometimes you might need to get like a letter from the water management district too. So basically any permit that you fill out, it's going to ask you, what species are currently in your lakefront? What do you plan to remove? What do you plan to replant? What percent of the lake is going to be affected? And how will you prevent, you have to promise to clean up all the vegetation and not just leave it in the lake to rot, because that can increase the nutrient loading. They want to see that you're going to do a good job, and then they will follow up afterwards to make sure that most of the plants that you planted survive. Sometimes it's like an 80% survival rate of whatever you wrote into the permit. So they will be following up, and you can get fined if you don't restore the lake properly.
Yeah, and they're there to help you, really. They're there to help you and to protect the water, which is a communal resource for everyone. There might be public access on your lake that people come from all over to fish and enjoy that lake, to swim. And so, it's their job to protect it. So now I'm just going to talk a little bit about our Seminole County Shoreline Protection Ordinance. And I'll try to hit the major topics here because I know not all of you are in Seminole, but for those of you that are, I just want you to know that as of April 27th, 2021, any shoreline alteration will require a Seminole County shoreline alteration permit unless it meets one of the exceptions. So shorelines on water bodies that are less than 2 acres or over 160 acres. So even if it's private, if it's under 2 acres, you're exempt. If it's over 160 acres, then you go to FWC. So it's a little different than Orange County where you have to get both. It's really what is the acreage of the lake, and then you either go to Seminole County or you go to FWC if it's over 160. If aquatic vegetation is removed via physical or mechanical methods within an access corridor of 50 feet or 50% of the shoreline, whichever is less, you don't need a permit. So if you have your access corridor where you have your launch and your jet ski and, you're just kind of, that's your little entry to the lake. If you're keeping that clear, you do not need a permit. If it's 50% of the total shoreline or 50 feet, whatever's less. These rules only apply to shorelines within unincorporated limits of Seminole County. So any of these city logos or any of our cities within Seminole County do not apply. You have to check with that city specifically to see what their rules are. Permits will soon be available through our website, so check on seminolecountyfl.gov. And then the Shoreline Protection Ordinance requires new waterfront development or significant redevelopment to protected shorelines by installing berm and swale systems or a vegetative buffer to reduce stormwater runoff and associated pollutants. And so if you're doing some kind of, redevelopment or something like that, you'll work with Thomas Calhoun in Seminole County. He's our principal environmental scientist, and they'll help you to make sure you're meeting all of those requirements. And again, really, these are here to make sure that the water stays clean. And, they're there to help you to integrate these into make a Florida-friendly shoreline. And so take a quick picture of his contact information. Feel free to call him or email him, and he's there to help with any of your permit questions.
Yeah, there's so many different rules. So, check with your local municipality, and sometimes the rules are different. Like here in Seminole County, Tina's saying you can have an access corridor of 50 feet. In some of the cities or Orange County, they may only give you 30 feet for an access corridor. So
it really depends. And so, check with them. And they're there to help you. So I'm seeing in the chat, somebody wants a list of companies. Tia and I don't have that, but they probably do. They probably have a long list of people that do consulting work, can come help you out, places where you can get plants. And so definitely working with them is always in your benefit to access those resources and the like.
Yeah, we just kind of tell people to Google in the phone book, like Lakefront Landscaping or Aquatic Weed Control, something with the plants like that. So let me sum it up here a little bit. So a permit may be needed. Again, it's not always needed, but in these cases, you can look at the Aquatic Weed Control Act. If you're hiring a professional, you may need a permit. If you're using an herbicide, you may need a permit. If the project proposes excavation like dredging, filling, or use of heavy equipment, you probably need a permit. So the permits aren't that hard to get. Don't be scared of the paperwork. You might just have to draw a diagram of your lakefront. I'll be showing you a sample one here in a minute. But just think, okay, permit needed if you're contracting it out, if you're using herbicide, or if you're really disturbing the soil in any way that's going to hurt the lake, because then they might require a turbidity barrier or some other type of protection there for the water quality. A permit may not be needed if you're like the homeowner and you want to get in and do it yourself by hand. That's usually, you don't need a permit. Now you just can't clear everything too, but to do a little work by hand, you can create your little 30-foot access corridor, maybe 50 feet in Seminole County or some of the cities. And then kind of the ongoing maintenance stuff, once you have your lakefront renovated and you want to do a little pruning, removing a couple of the dead leaves, removing some of the dead flower heads, or planting, like it's usually fine to go ahead and plant native plants in the lakefront. You usually don't need a permit for that. Again, check with your local municipality, but I don't think anybody's going to complain about you slipping in a couple pickerel weed or duck potato in your lake. But make sure you're planting native species. Like, don't get one of those tropical water lilies and stick it in your lake, because we want to stick with the native water lily. So if you do want to go ahead and renovate your shoreline, here's just some steps, how to get started doing that. You want to prepare the shoreline. Of course, getting the permit is the first step, and just seeing what's allowed in your municipality. Select the native plants that you want to plant. You might have to target which ones you want to remove too. Plant those plants, according to the right plant, right place, like Tina described with the different zones of the lakefront. And then set up a maintenance schedule. If you hire a professional, they might want to put you on a monthly program or a quarterly program or twice a year, just to come out and, hit anything like some little patch of torpedo grass or something might be popping up, and keep it looking good. A little bit of maintenance can go a long way. And then get involved, talk to your neighbors about this. This is a really important issue for all of our water bodies in Florida. That's why we're having this educational program today, because it's not just about one lakefront, it's about the whole lakefront, it's the whole water body. And we want to help to protect it. Everybody wants to be able to boat and enjoy their water. So get your community involved, your HOA, your neighbors, let them know which are the good and bad plants. And take time to do some research and know the laws, of the codes, the ordinances, and any other special things like Tina mentioned, the berm and the swale that will help to capture, excess water and nutrients. Be proactive, make sure you're doing it right. You have the permit, you have professionals who are licensed to spray, that they're using the proper aquatic labeled herbicides. And then finally, enjoy. It's a beautiful habitat out there, a lot of wildlife, and we're blessed with this wonderful resource here in Florida. So here's like a sample diagram with the access corridor. This was courtesy of the FWC. They gave this to me that I could use for an example. So, you're going to have to submit something similar to this if you apply for a permit. They want to have like the north arrow on it. They want to know, how big is the total lakefront? Is it 50 feet total? Is 100 feet total? Where is your proposed access corridor? Here, in this case, it's 30 feet. So this person's going to put it right around their dock. And so in this case, they're going to take out some of the native maiden cane and some of the native pickerel weed and some of the native knot grass. Those are all beneficial species, but we're just going to reduce them a little bit for that boat access. And then we're going to take out all of this bright yellow torpedo grass because that's one of the non-native nuisance species. So we're going to completely remove that torpedo grass and, maybe replant with some of the more native plants. But this is just the diagram for what's currently existing there and what's proposed. Sometimes they make you do a replanting diagram too. So if you wanted to have like a sample diagram for that, then I just created this one for you, this diagram. So you could submit this for, okay, I'm going to plant some pickerel weed, some duck potato. And when I do lakefront landscaping, I personally like to have the plants in like neat little clusters. I find it makes it easier to maintain, but it doesn't have to be like this. Some people plant like a whole solid wall, of one species, but in Florida Friendly, we do like to have a biodiversity of different species. And again, we have our upland plants like the cypress tree and the cordgrass, moving down towards the water line where we have the canna and the iris. Out in the water, the pickerel weed, the duck potato, maybe put the bulrush or the tall things on the corners. And then in the deeper water, the things like maiden cane, water lily, cow lily. And so they want to see, a lot of native plants out there. You can't just clear it all and leave it empty. That's illegal. And you can report people to the Environmental Protection Department if you do see them clearing and not replanting properly. So I think you just call 311 for that in Orange County. And just a little bit more about planting. So you want to plant with the proper spacing. Some of the permits will actually say no more than 3 foot spacing because they want to see tight spacing. 2 foot on centers is generally good for things like the cordgrass or the pickerel weed or duck potato. And so it's pretty easy to do. You just get out there with a shovel and, dig a little slit or a hole and sneak the plant behind the shovel and then lift the shovel up and step on it with your feet a couple times. It's really not that difficult. You can get a pair of swamp boots or waders or just an old pair of tennis shoes and put on your swimsuit and get out there to do that. Right now in February, this is a good time to work in your lakefront because the water level is low. And so you won't have to wade that deep. It will be easier to access, by hand with some simple, equipment like a shovel and machete. Here's some more planting. So some of the plants you might get from the nurseries will come bare root, like pictured on the left. This is the pickerel weed. And when they harvest them in the bare root plants like this, sometimes they'll rip off the extra leaves. In the middle here is the iris. And then to the right is a spike rush. There's many types of rushes that's in that kind of emergent zone. It grows in the water. And then after you plant the plants, expect the leaves to kind of get sunburnt a little bit. They'll go through a little transplant shock. You can see these are planted about 2 foot on center. And then you can see one in the back kind of fell down. So go out there the next couple days, make sure that all the plants are rooted nicely, fix any if they fell down or floated away. But within a week, they should be all set and ready to go. And we usually have a pretty good survival success rate. Another thing is if you have these plants already in your lakefront, they're very easy to propagate. So you can just take off a little piece of the root and start it in a new spot. And that's perfectly legal to do in most cases. So where to find plants? If you're in the Orlando area, Green Isle Gardens in Groveland, Florida, they have a whole wetland kind of species list. They sell plants. Also South Seminole Farm and Nursery has some. Statewide, you can look in the Florida Association of Native Nurseries, which is the FANN, the FANN, and you can search by your zip code and find some of the native plant nurseries closest to you, and then call them and just ask them if you have any water loving or aquatic or wetland plants. And a lot of these companies will have them, in their plant nurseries. So check that out. And then when we get to the maintenance, so don't forget to, set up a maintenance plan right after establishment. Here in this picture is a nice stand of duck potato along a seawall. So even if you do have a seawall, you can plant some beneficial plants there. And if you look closely in the picture, you'll see some blue spots, on the weeds right up against the seawall. So that's where they used an aquatic herbicide and used a little bit of blue marker to note where they sprayed. And so that's a very nicely maintained. You see they are hand pulling some of those brown leaves, and that's just to help make it look good. So it's okay to get in there by hand and pull off the brown, a couple times a year. That's not a problem, as long as you have a nice full stand of plants. Manage the nuisance species, and once the beneficial plants are really established, hopefully they'll be so full that there's not a lot of room for the invasive stuff to come in.
Yeah,
so go ahead.
I was just going to add, Tia, that, you definitely want to see if, it's a permitted kind of rodeo type product that you're using. But we want to use it if we're using it as a tool, to get to where we're established and well established, and we're not having such a reoccurrence of invasive plants that require repeated treatment, so that we're, using it as a tool to get to a more Florida friendly landscape.
Yeah, that's right. Kind of knock out the nuisance plants and then replant with natives, and then you should be good to go. So wrapping it up with a couple lake-friendly, Florida-friendly landscaping practices. Again, selecting appropriate plants, low-maintenance plants. You don't want to plant anything you're going to need to fertilize or prune regularly right next to your lakefront. Save that for further up closer to your house. Water efficiently, because extra watering can harm the lakes by putting the pollutants and the nutrients into the water. So follow those water restrictions in your area. Your fertilizer for your lawn, we have plenty of phosphorus in our soil here in Florida. So find phosphorus-free fertilizer unless your soil test says you need it. And also choose slow-release nitrogen. There's a lot of fertilizer ordinances around the state which have different requirements. It might be 50% slow-release nitrogen. It might be 65% slow-release nitrogen. So take one of our fertilizer classes and learn how to apply those. And keep those fertilizer, pesticides, even irrigation, keep that away from the water body, at least 25 feet. For Orange County, other counties might have different numbers. Is 25 feet correct in Seminole County too, Tina?
We're actually 15 feet. Some areas of Wekiva have like 50 feet, depending, but most of our county is 15 feet, even in the cities. The exception's Winter Springs.
Okay. Yeah, so that varies by county. In your landscape, we like mulch, a 2 to 3 layer of organic mulch, like pine bark, pine straw, the tree trimmer mulch. You can get mulch for free at chipdrop.com, that website. And, keep your landscape beds nice with some mulch. We like trees and shrubs. We like composting your yard waste, compost your food scraps from your house, and that will help you have a more sustainable yard, and you can use that to improve the soil health. And then your downspouts, don't just direct them straight into the lakefront. Instead, direct them into your turf or your landscape areas where the St. Augustine grass or whatever, your landscape trees and shrubs, they can filter out, that water that's coming off your roof. There could be some bacteria in there or other things. So don't just dump it straight into the lakefront, put it into your landscape areas. And, just be careful with your use of chemicals. We promote more of an ecological landscape where you want to attract beneficial insects to prey on the pests. And then when you do use chemicals, we promote natural and organic type of stuff and using the least toxic chemical as possible. Sometimes you do need to go a little heavier chemical if you have a severe problem like chinch bugs or something, but start with the least toxic stuff first. And you might not even need chemicals. Some of these beautiful caterpillars that you might hate, they actually turn into beautiful butterflies or moths. So if you have any questions about bugs, you can email us pictures of insects. We can help identify it, tell you if it's a good bug or a bad bug or what to do about it. And that's just all, the other Florida friendly principles here. So thank you for joining us today. And I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and we'll take action to have a beautiful lakefront, shorelines, your little rain garden or whatever kind of aquatic ecosystem you're going to create. And here's a couple resources for you. Here's some publications on stormwater plants for shorelines, a guide to selection and installing them on stormwater ponds. These are all available online. Also, some of the agencies we mentioned, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission, Orange County Environmental Protection. If you're in Orange County, check with your local water management district. In Central Florida, we mostly have the St. Johns River and then the South Florida Water District. So start by kind of calling them up and asking them who's in charge of your lake, and check with your other local municipalities. Just for more information, you can check out the Florida Water Atlas, and it will tell you, how big of a lake you have and some other details, how deep it is, a lot of information on there. And if you want more info on plants, check out our UF IFAS Center for Aquatic and Invasive Plants website. And you can Google it by a common name, cattails, or the scientific name, and it will tell you whether it's native, non-native, if it's a nuisance plant, and so on and so forth. Lots of great pictures on there. If you want to volunteer and get involved, there's the UF-IFAS Lake Watch program, where it's you collect water samples and contribute to a statewide database that monitors kind of like water quality. There's also the Seminole County Serve program. You can help clean water bodies, pick up trash, plant. They have lots of planting projects. And there's also a lot of local environmental groups. There's the Friends of the Lock Haven Chain of Lakes. So just check out some local groups for whatever lake you live on. There's the Friends of the Wekiva River. Lake Conway has a lake council. Lake Holden and Lake Anderson, they have a lakefront board. There's the Sierra Club, the Audubon Club, and different Facebook groups. I think the chain, Lake Butler chain, has a Facebook group. And so that's a good way to keep in touch with what's going on. So that concludes our webinar today. Thank you very much for coming. If you could please now take our survey for us by either scanning the QR code with your phone, or if you can follow the link in the chat, then that would be great. It really means a lot to us to get these survey results. And this time we'll open it up for questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Tia. And I'm just seeing a lot of gratitude in the chat. So right back to you all. Thank you so much for joining us. We do offer these for free, but the survey is your entry ticket to enter. So if you don't mind, take just a minute and fill that survey out for us. I did put lots of great links in the chat. So like Tia mentioned, the Center for Aquatic and Invasive Plants. We have a couple really good Seminole County books, the How to Plant Your Shoreline, the Seminole County Water Atlas, the Orange County Water Atlas. We're talking tons of data on those websites. We also have a book, The Guide to Lake Management. Check that out. We also have a couple of events coming up I put in there. And yeah, now we can turn to questions. And again, I do appreciate all of you for staying a little later. Of course, our IT thing set us back a little bit. I saw a good question in the chat about alligators, Tia. If they're down there in the lake shore, do they need to be cautious if it's a stormwater pond, a lake? Throughout the state, what do you think about alligators?
Well, if you live on the lakefront, you probably have a good idea of, how many alligators are in your lake. If you live on like Lake Jessup, that's well known for tons of alligators, you might be more cautious. But like Lake Conway, I swim in there all the time. I rarely see alligators. So they're usually not like hiding right underwater ready to bite you, but there have been several alligator attacks in Florida. So yeah, always be careful when you're working out there. And if it's not something you're comfortable doing, you can hire a professional.
The most important thing with wildlife is just respecting their space. And so a lot of the attacks happen when people are either inebriated or doing things to provoke the animal. And so if it's snakes, gators, whatever it is, respect the animal, respect its space, and just kind of, enjoy it from afar, that we're not taunting the animal or, provoking it. That's really important.
Yeah, keep the small dogs away from the lakefront too, because a lot of the gators are going after those.
Yeah, so George, welcome to Florida. And yes, we do have gators, but they're great creatures and part of our native ecosystem. And let's see, what else? Oh, the mulch question, Tia. So people are wondering, if they mulch the plants in the shoreline, how do they prevent it from eroding?
We don't really recommend mulching right on the shoreline. So when I was talking about mulch, I was just referring to the general landscape. But, right along the shoreline, you don't want to import any mulch and put it in that area. If you kind of have some cord grass that you trim a little bit, it's kind of okay to chop and drop that kind of straw stuff more in the upland, but we don't want any kind of mulch in the water or flowing into the water.
Yeah, excellent. Just a quick reminder, go ahead and complete the survey if you haven't yet done so. There's another good question here. If you're allowing your shoreline to fill in naturally, which, you know, if there's seeding going on in the water body, if things are vegetated in your neighbors and you're thinking it'll kind of just vegetate in, you know, how do they handle that, Tia? Do they use a weed whacker, or, you know, what do you recommend in that way if they're not doing a full-on planting?
I'm not really sure how to answer that question, but if you're just kind of letting it go and letting it do its thing naturally, then that's fine. You don't need to do anything. But when you're getting into, you know, alterations, especially clearing or herbicide or hiring a contractor, then you would definitely need a permit.
Yeah, and I know we have a recommended 10-foot buffer zone around our stormwater ponds. And, you know, if the HOA or whoever it is can't, you know, spend the funds to vegetate and buy the plants, we recommend just letting the seeds kind of come in, stop the mowing 10 to 15 feet away from the shoreline, see what starts coming in. You're still going to need to manage those invasive species. So either, you know, hand pulling, or if you need a permit or things like that to keep the invasives at bay while the natural seed bank takes root. But that's certainly a viable option if you're willing to be patient.
Yeah, and then kind of keep your eye out for the good plants versus the bad plants. Maybe do a little weeding from time to time.
Yeah, excellent. And so, Tia, I don't see too many questions here. I did want to see, do you have any events or different things they should be looking out for? It's February 16th, so I know spring is ahead of us. Didn't know if you had any events you wanted to plug real quick.
Yeah, we're doing our annual plant festival on Saturday, March 5th. That's from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. at our Orange County Extension Center. And our next webinar will be on butterfly gardening on Wednesday, March 9th.
Awesome. Very cool. Yeah, and we have our Seminole County Gardening Expo. I just put a link there. You can register on Eventbrite. We're gonna have lots of cool giveaways, including rain barrels and rain gauges and fertilizer, Florida-friendly fertilizer, and lots of great freebies. So it's on February 26th. Come on out, join us for the expo. I'm also going to be doing a talk on my new book, Plant This, Not That. And we'll have a webinar on Plant This, Not That, Avoiding Invasive Plant Species in Florida on March 2nd. There's the Zoom to register there as well. And I do see a question here about how can I get lake water tested? I'm in Volusia. So Lake Watch, which Tia mentioned, is a great program. You sign up as a volunteer, you get trained, and then you can actually see that. There might already be data. So check out the Water Atlas if you're in Seminole County or Orange County. I'm not sure if Volusia County has that, but a lot of the counties around the state actually pay for that service. So take advantage of it.
Great. Well, thank you all for joining us for the webinar today, and I hope to see you very soon. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Tia.
All right. Bye, everybody.